Hey everybody, welcome in to episode 27 of my YouTube journey. Tonight we're going to tackle part 2 of the Black Sox scandal. Part 1, we dove into the meetings, the ideas, went through the different gambling groups and stuff like that, and it was really interesting. And I stopped right before pitch 1 of the World Series in game 1, so we're going to dive into that tonight. At the end of it, we're going to show the W514 strip cards from the Black Sox players. In episode 1, we showed all the clean Sox. So I'll give you a little bit of history behind each player. It's pretty interesting. But I want to pub something real quick. My next video that will be released next week is going to be something I've been looking so forward to. Before I ever had my first YouTube episode, I thought one day I'm going to have this guy on. I listen to his podcast all the time. It is so interesting. He is a walking history book. He is a Shoeless Joe Jackson historian. We're not going to dive back into the Black Sox. Don't worry, I don't want to overdo that. But he knows everything there is to know about Shoeless Joe Jackson. He was the director of the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum for several years there in Greenville, South Carolina. And on his podcast, he blows me away with his knowledge. In fact, one of the things I used to get ready for this was listening to some of his podcasts and some of his guests that he had on, because they would talk about Shoeless Joe, but also talk about the Black Sox scandal. So you got to tune in for that. You will not be sorry. I can't wait to have Dan Wallach is his name. I can't wait to have him on. So pub that. So let's get into this story. So just to rehash, we had 2 gambling groups. One was run by Sports Sullivan out of Boston, and he had hooked up with Arnold Rothstein, who was basically a mafia boss in New York City, to get the money. Then we had Billy Maharg, Sleepy Bill Burns, Abe Attell, and the other guy that was in with them was David Zeltzer, and he was a guy from like Midwest. And then they were all being financed by the same guy, Arnold Rothstein. So it was crazy how the same guy was, and I don't even know if both groups knew the other one exists. I don't know if we know that or not. But we know a lot more about Billy Maharg's group, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. So we get into the World Series. I'm sure the players' hearts were racing. I don't know. I'm guessing they were nervous. Eddie Cicotte, being the starting pitcher, they had to have the starting pitchers get on board to make this work. We already talked about if Red Faber isn't out with catching that really deadly flu strain that went through basically the whole earth. It was just like what we experienced in 2020. If he wouldn't experience that, they wouldn't have been able to throw the World Series. There would have been no way possible, because he would have been the ace. He was the ace in 17 when they won it, and he was their ace in 20, 21, and 22 as well. So they didn't have him. So Eddie Cicotte knew he was the guy. He was the smart one, if you really want to call it that. But he asked for the money up front. And so he got $10,000 before they ever left Chicago to go to Cincinnati. Nobody else thought ahead enough to do that. So Eddie Cicotte throws the first pitch down the middle, strike 1. Next pitch, drills the Cincinnati batter in the back, and that's the sign to the gamblers that the fix is on. What's wild about this is, as we go on, I'm not going to go through each game, but as we go on through the series, the 2 best hitters, average-wise and from extra base hits, were Shoeless Joe Jackson and Buck Weaver, two of the guys. So you can't really say that, hey, they didn't really try. I don't really know how to explain it, because they obviously did at points, but there were times where maybe the defensive play didn't happen. I don't think there's anything suspicious any time during the series with Buck Weaver. Some people say that Shoeless Joe didn't go after a couple of balls, or that he maybe could have caught, or he put himself out of position in the outfield on purpose. I don't know. But all I know is he got some hits. He didn't get hits in a lot of cases with people on base. But let's get into this. Game 1, Cicotte's on the mound. He gets beat. He's undone by some Swede Risberg errors at shortstop. Cicotte walks some batters. He probably threw some meatballs in there, and they get beat. I'm going to have to look at this. I can't remember. They lost 9-1. after the game, they were supposed to, the deal was after each loss, the gamblers would bring them $20,000. Now, this is not the Sports Sullivan group. We don't know what that deal was, but this is the Abe Attell group with Sleepy Bill Burns and Maharg. So after the game, no money. The guys are getting a little worried. They decide to go on and play game 2. So now we got Lefty Williams on the mound. He walks, I think, 6-7 batters. He never walked. He was a control pitcher just like Eddie Seacott. Walked some batters. Again, some errors, some untimely errors. They lose 4-2. After the game, Gandil goes and meets with the bettors or the gamblers, and they say, man, we got a lot of money on the series. Our money's tied up. Sorry about that. But right now, all we can pay you, we owe you $40,000, but we're going to give you 10. So he gives him 10,000. Also after the game in the locker room, Ray Schalk, the catcher, confronts Lefty Williams because he's missing his spots. He's crossing him up. He knows something's up. Like, what the crap's going on? Eddie Seacott had done the same thing in game 1, so he confronts him. Some people say they got into an altercation and even got into a fight. We don't know that for a fact. We also know after game 1 that the manager, Skip Gleason, or Kid Gleason, sorry about that, Kid Gleason confronted the team, said, look, I'm hearing some rumors. I hope they're not true. We need to be playing this on the up and up. So he tries to call him out. Game 3 happens. Dickie Kerr's on the mound. He's the rookie, 26-year-old rookie, and wasn't expecting much out of him. Throws the game of his life. Throws a 3-hitter. Now, what's this do? We don't really know what it does to the Sports Sullivan group because we don't even know, like, had they been paying money, and we'll get to that at the end. We don't know. But what that does to Billy Burns and Maharg is it burns them. They got money on that game. And all of a sudden, this pitcher who's not involved in the scandal wins the game, throws a 3-hitter, and never allowed a guy past second base. And because of that, they lost a lot of money. They were betting the money that they were supposed to be giving the players. Also, when Cincinnati was winning, the betting odds changed. Now, Cincinnati was the favored team. So to bet on the White Sox really wasn't doing a lot for you. So now they don't even know if it's still on or not. So they play game 4. Seacott tells the gamblers, hey, we're still going to do this. We're going to lose on purpose. Don't worry about it. Seacott goes out there, same thing. He makes some errors. He walks some guys. Happy Felsch makes a bunch of errors, and it's just terrible. And they lose that game 2-0. And after that game, the players are about to walk, and so they are given $20,000 by the Sleepy Bill Burns side. We don't know about the other side what they were given, but they're given $20,000, and that $20,000 is spread out between Swede Risberg, Happy Felsch, Lefty Williams is given $10,000 by Chick Gandil, and told him, because he was rooming with Shoeless Joe, said, when you get in your room, give Joe $5,000 of this. So he gives Joe his $5,000. It's in a dirty envelope. Joe has to tell his wife at that point what he's involved with, and so does Lefty Williams. He tells his wife. Lefty Williams' wife is mad at him for doing that. Joe Jackson's wife says she's more disappointed and upset with him because he didn't run it by her first. Being that he was not able to read or write, he counted on her a lot. And so for him not to run that by her was strange. Like, that's really weird for him not to do that. So she's upset with him. They go out and play game 5. Lefty Williams, again, Happy Felsch errors, sink them. Lefty Williams pitches like crap again, loses 5-0. That's his second loss in the series. Eddie Seacott's lost 2 games, and then it's Dickie Kerr time again in game 6. He scatters 11 hits. Felsch makes some more errors, and they win this one 5-4. Now they're still, if they lose, they're out. So they come in, they play game 7. We don't know what happened here because Eddie Seacott looks like he played to win. Don't know. but they win 4-1. He pitches his best game. Now the gamblers, I don't know what they're thinking. Like, I don't see, it has to be crazy. And then game 8, Lefty Williams comes out and just gets shelled. Doesn't even last through the first inning. They lose 10-5. It's the worst game of his life. Game over. They lose the World Series. They go back to the hotel. They think, well, where's our money? We don't know, like, were they confronting people? Was there a lot of anger? We have no idea. All we know is they lost, they left, they went home, and probably thought, well, nobody's ever going to know, but dang it, we got double-crossed. So what the irony is, and we'll get to this in a minute when we talk about each player, the winning side, the Reds, their winning portion was $5,200 a player, and a lot of the players for the White Sox only got $5,000. If they'd have played it straight up and won, they'd have made basically the same amount of money and got to keep playing and wouldn't have been crooked. Anyways, everything happens for a reason. So the next day, the day after, Comiskey's getting all these rumors thrown at him that the game was thrown, that the series was thrown. So he goes into the newspaper and says, I think my boys played to win, but just to prove it and be safe, I'm offering a $10,000 reward for anybody that can come to me with any kind of evidence that the series was thrown. There was a group out of St. Louis, a group of bettors, gamblers, who had lost money on the White Sox and were mad about it. So they reached out to him and told him they had proof, and they were naming names. So of all things, he sends Kid Gleason to St. Louis to meet with these gamblers 3 days after the World Series ends. So put yourself in Kid Gleason's shoes. On one hand, I'm sure he's wanting to know the truth. He probably thinks he knows that it was thrown. He knows his guys. They spend every day together. He had to know something was up. But on the other hand, he's probably thinking, please tell me they didn't do this. He goes down there. The gamblers are naming names of the 8 guys. They name all 8 of them. Kid Gleason comes back, does a report to Comiskey. Now Comiskey is doing a full-fledged investigation. Also, one day after the World Series ends, there was a reporter named Hugh Fullerton there in Chicago, and he does a story and said he's hearing that there's 7 players that ain't going to be back next year. And at first it was always 7. He didn't name names, but Buck Weaver was never included in the beginning. But he didn't name names. And a week later, or maybe it's a month later, I've got all this written down, Collier's Eye, which is a gambling publication, starts writing about it. It was a month later, and they name the names. They say it's 7 players that ain't going to be back because of gambling allegations, but they do not name Buck Weaver. A month later, in December, Ray Schalk is asked about it by a reporter, and he names those 7 guys. He names them by name and gets in a lot of trouble because he's thinking, I don't know what he's thinking, but that just shows you the divide. He didn't care to throw those guys under the bus, but I don't blame him. I'd be mad too. I wanted to win the World Series, and they blew it for me because they wouldn't play it straight up. And so it goes on. And this is the irony of everything. And I never really knew this until I got deep into this. And maybe I purposely did not watch the movie 8 Men Out. I didn't want that to cloud anything I was looking at, because there's some inconsistencies in that movie that aren't right, and I didn't want to have those in my mind. So they do the inquiries, and they can't find any solid evidence. And the bottom line is, Comiskey, if he can't find evidence, they can't do nothing about it. Let's sign the team back. Let's win the World Series the next year. So they roll into 20. 7 of those guys are back. Chick Gandil's not back. They went to his house in California and tried to present him a contract for $4,000, what he had been making since 1917. He wanted $10,000. He knew they weren't going to give it to him, but he had made a bunch of money throwing the World Series. We think he was skimming off the top quite a bit. And they get out there. He's bought him a new cottage home, had a brand new car, and so he obviously had money. So he basically retires. But 7 of those guys are back. They are set. for the first time in the history of baseball, they had 4 pitchers who were 20-game winners on the same staff. They're stacked. So they go into the season, but now the factions are even worse. The guys that played the Clean Sox, they aren't liking the Black Sox guys. It's even worse than it was before. They don't want anything to do with them. But despite all that, they're still in first place most of the season. They get down towards the end. And in the book, The Glory of Their Times, I believe it's Joe Wood said that Eddie Seacott told him at one point that they didn't dare win in 1920. And he didn't really understand what he was talking about. But basically what he's talking about was, I think they were scared to bring more attention on themselves, is what he was saying. So I don't know whether they were throwing games down towards the end. I don't really know what was going on, but something was definitely going on. So then all this stuff starts happening. So in August of 1920, there's a big scandal in the PCL, Pacific Coast League, which is the highest minor league system. It's AA, but back then that's as high as they went. And it's between, they didn't have playoffs or World Series. So basically, if you finished in the top 3 there, whoever finished first in the regular season was considered the champion, would get more money. Second place would get a lesser share, and third place a lesser share. In 1919, there was a bunch of scandal going on. People said one of the teams laid down for another team, similar to what happened with Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker. And so in 1920, it happens again. And this time, Mr. Wrigley, the owner of the Cubs, finds out about it, and he's mad. He's looking at buying one of the teams out there, and all this mess is going on. And there's one guy in the middle of it in 1920, and it's Hal Chase again. The same rotten scoundrel who had gotten Abe Patel in touch with Sleepy Bill Burns and his group to get Arnold Rothstein's money. So he's always got his hand in these fixes. So that's going on. And right before that happened, in August of 1920, Wrigley gets word one game that, hey, we're playing the Phillies. There's a lot of money going in on the Phillies, and it was a meaningless game. It wasn't in a pennant race, nothing. But there was a lot of money going in on the Phillies, and he was getting rumors coming to him saying, hey, that game's going to get thrown. So he got out in front of it and went to his manager and said, hey, if this game's getting thrown, change the pitcher. I don't want whoever you were going to pitch that thought he was going to pitch, throw somebody else and mess up their scheme. At least we know we got a clean pitcher. And I don't remember who won or who lost. That's not important. But it got out there, and he thought that game was thrown too. So he's getting upset. He goes to one of the judges there in Chicago and wants an inquiry into throwing games. So once the judge agrees to do that, he's really good friends with Ban Johnson, the American League commissioner. He agrees to do that. Then Ban Johnson goes in there and says, hey, also investigate the 1919 World Series. There's rumors going around. So what starts out as a trial just to try to get to the bottom of a meaningless game between the Phillies and the Cubs turns into the Black Sox trial. So now they're convening a grand jury on September 20th of, I got this written down right here. On September 20th of 1920, it gets blown all to pieces. I'm sorry, September 27th. Billy Maharg talks to a Philadelphia paper and spills the beans, tells them all about it, names players, names places they met, tells the whole story about the Black Sox scandal to a newspaper. They can't even get him after that. Comiskey tries to get him to come to Chicago and talk to the grand jury. He refuses to do it, but he later gets named as a defendant. Then the players, they start calling in the players. Eddie Seacott's the first one they call in, and he confesses. He confesses to doing it, but he says he only threw game one. He felt so bad about it after game one that he decided not to do it again, and he played on the up and up. He just played bad. But he did take the $10,000. Shoeless Joe Jackson is the next one to come in. He tells a similar story that he did take the money, but he never tried to lose the game. He just thought, hey, if everybody's getting paid, I'm going to take some too. So he did that. And then the next one in is Lefty Williams. Now, when Lefty Williams comes in, he names all the names, and he names Buck Weaver too. So now Buck Weaver's a part of the deal. So they give their testimony to the grand jury. It's all written down. Before they can get to trial, there's a change in the leadership there in that county. And when that leadership group leaves, it was the Democrats, when they left office, they took a lot of the records, or it just wasn't filed completely. Now the new DA comes in there and he's got to do the trial. He doesn't have all the records he needs. He can't even find the testimonies. They're gone. And so he's like going to the judge trying to get him to postpone it or move it back, and the judge won't do it. And so what they did, they just said the case is dismissed, and dismissed the case with the idea that they were going to come back and reconvene and have another grand jury, and they were going to do it all over again. And that's exactly what they do. So they bring them into court. They try all the players. They try the gamblers. They have them all in there. They got the jury in there, and also Maharg. He turns state witness, Billy Maharg. He gets immunity in return. He is going to be the star witness for the prosecutors. So the first person they call to the stand is Comiskey, and basically he's trying to convince the jury that the players are out to get him, and they were losing this game on purpose to make him lose money, and he was trying to make the players look bad and all this other stuff. And then he leaves the stand, and then they call Billy Maharg, and he's a very likable guy, and he tells the story, and they can tell the jury's all into it and listening. And then after that, they call Sleepy Bill Burns, and he's doing the same thing. He's answering the questions well and everything. So the prosecutors are feeling great about this case. What they had done is, because they couldn't find the grand jury testimonies from the first time, the players were saying they were offered immunity is the only reason they said it, and the prosecutors saying, no, we didn't. So because of all that was going on, the judge said, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back and get the stenographer's notes, and we're going to do the testimony. We're going to make it all over again. They had the notes, so they basically had the testimony. So they just did it. It was exactly the same. The defense didn't argue with that. They were okay with that. But the one thing that the judge made them do, the only person named in their testimony, is like on Shoeless Joe Jackson's, would be Joe Jackson. But if he was talking about Happy Felsch or Lefty Williams or Eddie Seacott, that name had to be blocked out. So they had to go through and read, and it was tedious, and they lost the jury during the whole thing. They lost them. And so the defense never called a player to put him on the stand. The prosecutors thought they would, but they didn't, so they screwed up their whole plan. And so at the end, they rest. And so they do their closing arguments. And the entire closing argument by the defense was basically saying Comiskey was a miser. He wasn't paying the players what they were worth. And he knew he had a lot of blue-collar, hard-working folks in that jury, and he was trying to paint the picture that the players were the hard-working folks, and the man, the boss, was taking advantage of them, and he wasn't paying them, and he tried to win those people over to the players' side, and it worked. It absolutely worked. So when it came time to deliberate, they were in the deliberation room for like 3 hours, come out, said, we figured it out. And they read it out, and they said not guilty. At that time, the courtroom erupts. Everybody's excited. The players are excited. In fact, that night, they go have a party at a local restaurant downtown, and all the jurors are there partying with the players. And at the end of the party, they're all singing together, got their arms around each other, singing, "Hail, hail, the gang's all here," which is an old song back then. So they think, man, we beat it. And once again, you can gamble, you can do whatever you want, you're going to get away with it. Slap on the wrist, maybe even get taken to court, but hey, nothing's going on, we're free. Wrong. Kennesaw Mountain Landis had watched what happened in that PCL thing and saw the commissioner. That commissioner went in, and the guys that were part of that, even though it hadn't gone to court, he took liberties and said, you guys are gone, suspended, you're done with baseball. Hal Chase was one of those guys. He was kicked out, no longer part of the game. Kennesaw Mountain Landis came out right after the not guilty and said he didn't care what the court said, that all 8 of those guys were banned for life. Never going to play again. Hal Chase was banned. And then the little known thing right here was another guy was banned. Second baseman of the St. Louis Browns was banned. His name was Joe Gideon. And here's how he got banned. And this is crazy. When Comiskey put up that reward, it's kind of like you see the police will put a sting out there and go, hey, if you do this, you get free tickets to the Titans game, and they aim it towards criminals, and they show up, and then they find them and they arrest them. Kind of the same thing. Comiskey put that $10,000 reward out. Joe Gideon came forward trying to get the money and said, yeah, Swede Risberg had called me and told me, put money on the Reds. We're throwing the series. And because he knew of it, because he had knowledge of it, he was kicked out too. And the only way they knew about that is because he basically told on himself. And so Kennesaw Mountain Landis threw him out. So here comes the whole thing, the whole dilemma. Is Shoeless Joe Jackson done wrong? Is Buck Weaver done wrong? Are any of these guys done wrong? So basically, here's the bottom line. Kennesaw Mountain Landis said, if you have knowledge, and you don't come to somebody immediately and tell them and out your fellow players, then you're guilty as if you took $100,000. That's what he said. And he had to say that. He had to. The game had to be cleaned up. It was out of control. The integrity of the game was over. It was out of control. So that's what he did. He cleaned it up. Gone. In the past, when something like what just happened, they brushed it under the rug, let it go, because in the end, they needed the players. They were making gate receipts. In fact, the White Sox had their biggest year ever in 1920 as far as crowds come in and everything else. So he wasn't going to mess up his golden goose. You know what? Maybe they did it. Maybe they don't. I don't care. There's a lot of people paying to see him, and we got a good team. So he wasn't going to do anything. And so by Kennesaw Mountain Landis doing what he did, he set a precedence. So Buck Weaver never took a dime, but he said in every meeting, and he didn't out him. Guilty. Shoeless Joe Jackson never attended a meeting, but admitted to taking $5,000. He's guilty. Whether he played to win or he didn't win, it didn't matter. He was guilty. And because Kennesaw Mountain Landis did that, it worked. Later on in subsequent years, players actually did what he expected them to do. They would go and out their fellow player. There were instances, I should have counted it. I'm sorry I didn't. You can look it up. There were 4 or 5 instances where guys got banned for life after this in the subsequent years because of that precedent that he set. So it worked. He cleaned it up. Now, Kennesaw Mountain Landis ain't my favorite because of the way he treated African-American players and refused to let them play in the major leagues. He'd always try to play it off like, oh, there's no written rule about that. But it was a gentleman's agreement. There didn't have to be a written rule. Everybody knew the rule, and he was the one who helped enforce it. In fact, when Bill Veeck tried to buy the Philadelphia Phillies, I'm getting on a soapbox right here. When Bill Veeck tried to buy the Philadelphia Phillies with the idea that he was going to integrate the Phillies, this was before the Brooklyn Dodgers ever even thought of it. And his idea was these guys had fought in the war. We're going to bring them home. We're going to integrate it. And I'm going to win with all these great Negro League players. Kennesaw Mountain Landis, he screwed up. When he was telling Kennesaw Mountain Landis he wanted to buy the Phillies, he mentioned his plan. And Kennesaw Mountain Landis squashed it. He made sure the sale went through to somebody else other than Veeck, and was paying less money than Veeck. So he was not he wasn't pure white either. So there's a little bit of gray in everybody, I guess. So whether or not Shoeless Joe will ever get in the Hall of Fame, I don't know. But what we do know, that White Sox team, you look at it, they had Red Faber, Hall of Famer. Eddie Seacott would have been a Hall of Famer. Ray Schock, Hall of Famer. Eddie Collins, one of the best second basemen to ever play the game, Hall of Famer. Lefty Williams was on a pretty decent track. Of course, Shoeless Joe, he would have been a Hall of Famer. There's an argument to be made that Eddie Collins could have been a Hall of Famer. Happy Felsch, he was coming into his own. He was a star. Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb both picked him in their all-time team as the center fielder. So they were loaded. There was a really good chance they're going to go on one of those dynasty runs. But unfortunately, they didn't because of the Black Sox scandal. So sometimes you got to look back in the past to learn and to grow and look at it like, look, this happened for a reason. Finally, somebody put their foot down and stopped it, because if they didn't do it then, who knows how long it goes on and what it does to the game, not just baseball, but any game. So after that, all sports got cleaned up. So thank you so much for hanging in there. We're going to go jump into these cards. We're going to talk about each individual player. We'll make it quick because I know this has been kind of long. And please join me next week. It's going to be awesome with Dan coming in. You won't regret it at all. He is so great. So thanks so much. We're going to look at some cards now. All right, everybody, I'm back. I want to show you this book real quick. It's called Scandal on the South Side, 1919 Chicago White Sox, edited by Jacob Pomrenke. This is a Sabre book, and it has been one of the books that I've really leaned into for this episode. I've done a lot of podcasts from Dan Wallach as well. My Baseball History is what his is called. And so anyways, this is a great book. This is the one I'm getting all the biographical information about each player. Even talks about the Bat Boy, of all things, his story. And so there's a lot of really awesome information they have really dug into that is a lot better than what Elliot Asnoff was able to do in the 60s with his book, 8 Men Out. The first player is Joe Jackson. He's one of my favorite players to collect. I love his story. I love where he came from and how good a player he was. I hate it ended the way it did for him. But, you know, he's just a guy from a really poor area there in South Carolina, Pickens County, and was a lint head from the time he was 6 years old. Didn't go to school, didn't learn to read or write. We all know the story. Watch my Shoeless Joe episode for more. But after this was over, he did sue the White Sox like several players did, trying to get back pay, and did a civil suit against them. His is the only one that actually went to trial. He lost. Well, actually, he did win. He won the trial because the jury said that Comiskey was already privy to the fact that they had thrown the World Series when he signed him to a contract in 20, and so he owed him the money. And so the judge, though, overruled him and threw the case out because he said that Joe Jackson perjured himself, because in the grand jury testimony he had admitted to do it, and all through that episode he's 100 times said that he was innocent and never took money and never tried to throw the game. So he really had different stories, and unfortunately it bit him in the butt. When he was done, he loved playing baseball, so he kept playing independent ball. He then, when he was too old for that, he ran a liquor store, he ran a dry cleaners, he ran a restaurant in Greenville, South Carolina. He liked to teach kids how to play ball. There's this story about Ty Cobb coming into his liquor store one time, and he had Grantland Rice with him, actually, so we know it really happened. Grantland Rice, the historic writer that was so great at being a sports writer, even retold the story. But Ty Cobb gets up to the counter, and Joe's acting like he didn't know him. And Ty Cobb finally said, "Joe, are you not going to say hello to me?" He said, you acting like you don't know me. And Joe said, "Well, I didn't think you'd want to know me." And he was just ashamed. So here's the sad part. Joe died when he was 63 years old in December of 1951. He was voted into the Cleveland Indians Hall of Fame in September of 51, and the next season was going to be honored at a game. And then because of that coming out and the fame of that, Ed Sullivan decided to have him on his Toast of the Town show in New York City. But Shoeless Joe Jackson died 2 weeks before he could go, because that would have been his moment in the sun, his time to get some love for his career that didn't have to do with the Black Sox. And unfortunately, he didn't get to get those flowers. So that again is another tragic tale from Shoeless Joe's life. But Shoeless Joe was a good guy. The only money he received from that World Series was $5,000. All right, the next one is Eddie Seacott. And again, he was one of the ringleaders. And I'm going to show, again, I got doubles. So do not comment on this one. Don't do what you did last week. There's no reason to do it twice. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to watch episode 1 and do what I told you to do, and you'll get in on it. But I'm going to have a drawing for this card, and we're going to do it on next week's episode with Dan. I'm going to do that wheel thing that you put all the names on, so it'll be on the up and up. Everybody can see who wins on that episode. So good luck to everybody. We got a lot of contestants from episode 1. I was blown away by how many people actually watched and listened and did what I told them to do. So again, I'm not going to repeat what you got to do, but if you want to do it, you got to go back to episode 1 and listen, and then do what I tell you to do. So, but here's the other Eddie Seacott. This is the one without the holes, and it's still got some wear on it. Got a little bleed through. They're blank backs, as I was talking about. If you didn't see episode 1, I'll show you, but these are numbered cards, and I really like these cards because they are actually from Charles Conlon Images. They're just colored and anyways, enhanced. His nickname was Knuckles, and he's possibly one of the first pitchers to ever master the knuckleball. He was a spin pitcher. He threw salad. He didn't throw hard. He couldn't break a window with his fastball, but he hit his spots, changed speed, spin it around. He won 209 games in his career, and like I said earlier, he was probably destined for the Hall of Fame. In 1912, he came over to the White Sox when he was 28 years old. He had already played for Detroit and Boston, had some lackluster success there. When he was in Boston, he perfected what he called the shine ball. In 1917, their championship season was his breakout season. He was first on the team in wins. He won 28. First on the team in ERA with 1.53, and first on the team with inning pitch in 346. So he was a star. In 1919, he had another great year. Again, Red Faber wasn't there. He had to kind of carry the team, him and Lefty Williams, and he did it. He bought a farm. He was from up north, I believe it was Wisconsin. He bought a farm and had a $4,000 mortgage on it. He was supporting a family of 12, according to the census at that time. So you can kind of find out why maybe he was getting a little greedy and wanted some extra money. He got the $10,000 underneath his pillow the night before they left for Cincinnati. And after his career was over, he lived on that farm. He worked at a gas station, and then at the end, he worked for many, many years until he retired for the Ford Motor Company. So again, he was from Michigan, my fault. So that explains he was in Detroit. At the end, he's quoted as saying, "I admit I did wrong, but I've paid for it the past 45 years." Eddie Seacott only got the $10,000 that we know about. He died at 84 years old on May 5th, 1969 in Detroit, Michigan. Next player is Happy Felsch. Happy was from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he had a 6th grade education. So again, that's why he fit in with the rough and tumble guys, with Chick Gandil and Shoeless Joe and all those guys. He was 5'10", 180 pounds, had real broad shoulders, had a cannon for an arm. Like I said earlier, Babe Ruth picked him as the best defensive center fielder during his time playing. So that goes a long ways when Ruth says that. He had a really easygoing nature, had a wonderful smile, and that's why he got the name Happy. He had lots of power. He's said to have hit a 500-foot home run at one point. In August of 1914, the White Sox bought him from Milwaukee's minor league team for $12,000. So it was a huge deal at the time. They saw a lot in this young guy. He was leading the minor leagues, and so they wanted him on his team. So in 1915, when he showed up, he shows up with Eddie Collins and Joe Jackson at the same time. They're starting that White Sox dynasty that they think is going to be a thing. In 1917, he has a breakout season. His stats compare with Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker that year. He was the toast of Milwaukee and Chicago after they won the World Series that year, and could do no wrong at all. In 1918, when the work or fight edict came down, he worked for the Milwaukee Gas Company, and he was one of the guys. Him and Joe Jackson and Lefty Williams got lambasted by Comiskey for not fighting in the war effort, instead working for the war effort. And so that could explain a little bit about maybe why they would do what they did. I just think they wanted the money, though. When he was done, he barnstormed until 1931. And after that, he ran a saloon, he operated a crane, did odd and end jobs. But towards the end of his life, he was really bad off. He had part of his leg amputated from some health issues he had. And Elliot Asanoff came to him and wanted to interview him for the book he was writing. This would have been in the early 60s. And so he became one of the main sources of Elliot Asanoff's 8 Men Out book. So he interviewed Happy Felsch. None of the other Black Sox players would talk to him. The other guy that Elliot Asanoff really counted on was Abe Attell. And so Abe Attell, being one of the gamblers, one of the ringleaders, told his side. And Abe Attell, when he told the story, he wanted to sound very important. And so that's why Elliot Asanoff's accounting of the story isn't exactly historically correct. But you have to give him a break, because at that time, he didn't have the court documents. They weren't found until years later. He didn't know that the White Sox were the second highest paid team in Major League Baseball, because it wasn't until 20 years ago that the salary cards were found by Major League Baseball. So he didn't have all that at his disposal, so I'll give him a break on that. But anyways, this is Happy Felsch. Next player is Chick Gandil. One thing I forgot to mention on Happy Felsch, we think he only got $5,000 out of the whole thing. Chick Gandil, he was one of the ringleaders along with Eddie Seacott, and he was a piece of work. Wasn't liked by a lot of people. In the book, Glory of Their Times, again, that book was, those interviews happened for that book in the 60s. So Elliot Asanoff's accounting of his book must have already came out. Something had prompted the writer of the Glory of Their Times to continuously ask the players about the Black Sox scandal. If you listen to the audiobook, and to a man, they all blamed Chick Gandil, said he was a bad guy, nobody really liked him. But he grew up in Berkeley, California. He ran around with gamblers. He frequented pool halls. But that was pretty common back in that dead ball era. He came up in 1912 with the Washington Senators. And he debuted with the White Sox in 1910. Went to the Senators in 12 and was back with the White Sox in 18. He didn't like Eddie Collins. I've already told that story about Eddie Collins breaking his nose when he slid into second one time. We think he double-crossed all the other players. We think that Sport Sullivan was giving money to him as the middleman, and he wasn't handing it out. So we think he got up to $35,000. That's why he retired after that. He wanted to go back to California and retire with his wife. Several of the players even said that he had a new car every year. They knew he had gotten a lot of money. In 1920, when they tried to re-sign him, he requested $10,000, knowing he wasn't going to get it. Instead, Comiskey offered him $4,000 that he had made the previous years, and he refused. So he basically, at that time, retired. After that, he put together a barnstorming team. They played down on that New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, Mexico line. He had Hal Chase, Buck Weaver, Lefty Williams, and other band players were playing in that Copper League down there. In the 1930s, he became a plumber, and till the day he died, he always denied any involvement in the Black Sox scandal. And he died, he was 82 years old on December 13th, 1970, and that's Chick Gandil. The next player is Fred McMullen. Don't have a W514 strip card for him, so I bought this one on eBay. Wasn't very expensive at all. It's from the Conlon collection. It's a great Conlon image. Again, most of these cards are Conlon images, easy for him to say. So anyways, he is known as the forgotten man in the Black Sox folklore. He's also called the eighth man out. He is the guy that didn't even play in the World Series. He never started. He got 2 at-bats, but he was a utility guy. Kid Gleason would use him to shake up the lineup. He'd put him at third base and move Eddie Collins. Well, Eddie Collins would stay at second. He'd move Buck Weaver to short. He did that at the end of the 1917 season, and I believe Fred McMullen started the whole World Series. Coming into 18, McMullen probably thought he was going to have a bigger part of the team, and he didn't get another chance. So, I'm sure that hurt him pretty bad. And 1919, same thing. He never got a chance, and then Swede Risberg would start not hitting or making errors, and Kid Gleason would do it again. He moved Buck Weaver to short, put McMullen in. McMullen would take off and do really well, and only to see his playing time get taken away again. So I'm sure he held some resentment. He was a pretty hard scrabble guy. He wasn't very educated. When he got done with his career, he moved it back to LA where he's from, and was a woodworker for a while, and then finally had a career in law enforcement of all things. He became a deputy marshal in LA County, and did that until he retired. And it's said that he got anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000. He was really close to Chick Gandil, and Gandil probably took care of him. Or maybe he went to him and said he was going to expose him if he didn't get some money. Who knows what happened? We don't really know, but we think he got a pretty good payday. He did get re-signed and come back in 1920. Again, the only one that didn't was Chick Gandil. So anyways, that's Fred McMullen. Next guy is going to be Swede Risberg. He was the shortstop, and he was a kind of a guy that was before his time. He was tall. He was 6 foot, 175 pounds. It was really tall for a middle infielder back then. So I guess he would have been like Cal Ripken Jr. was back when he broke in the 80s. He was only 26 years old when he was banned for life. So he had most of his career ahead of him. Had a cannon for an arm. He was from San Francisco, had an 8th grade education, so that's why he fell into that group. Had a hot head, loved to fight, but he was very inconsistent on the field. He was replaced again in the 1917 season by Fred McMullen, but yet they were close friends. When it's said that after Game 4, that Joe Jackson had made a comment to Risberg that if he didn't get his money, that he was going to expose the whole plot. And it's said that Risberg told him he was going to kill him if he told anybody. So Risberg was definitely knee-deep in this scandal. Remember what I talked about earlier. He phoned his friend in St. Louis that played for the Browns, an infielder named Joe Gedeon, told him that he needed to put some money on the Reds to win because they were throwing the World Series. So he was trying to help out his friends. He was trying to help out himself, but in the end, he didn't help anybody. In Game 1 and Game 6, he had a ton of errors, cost him the game basically. In 1922, him and his wife divorced. He hit hard times. He ended up remarrying. He played ball until the 1930s. After that, he ran a tavern and did that for the last 20 years of his life. And in the 1960s, Elliot Asanoff tried to interview him and went to his saloon. And he was being real nice to him until he told him he wanted an interview. And then Elliot Asanoff recalled him giving this really cold look, and it was kind of scary. But he died. He was 81. He actually died on his 81st birthday on October 13th, 1975. And he was the last of the Black Sox to die. So he was the last one. He was one of the youngest ones to get banned, but one of the last ones to die. So that's Swede Risberg. Next guy is going to be Lefty Williams. And again, him and Eddie Seacott were going to be the two guys that were dependent on the most. He had back-to-back 20-win seasons in 1919 and 1920, and he was one of the most promising left-handed pitchers in the game at the time. He was 5'9", 160 pounds, and close to my heart. In 1913, he played for my Nashville Vols here in Nashville at Sulphurdale Stadium when he was 20. He did well. He got sold to Detroit and made his debut there in 1913 with Ty Cobb's team. In 1916, he went over to the White Sox. When the worker fight order came down, he decided to follow Jackson to Delaware and worked in a shipyard and played ball there, but also worked. Comiskey hated that again. He was one of the guys that Comiskey said he was never going to let play on his team again. But just like he did after the scandal, he wanted to win, so he would take him back. But I'm sure that made Lefty Williams dislike Comiskey. In 1919, he made 40 starts, 10 alone in July. And the reason was, of course, we had Dickie Kerr pitching a lot, but Eddie Seacott was having arm trouble, and he was injured, and they were trying to rest him for the stretch run and for the World Series, knowing that they were hoping they would get Red Faber back, but it didn't happen, and so they were resting him, and so Lefty Williams had to carry the load. After Game 2, again, Ray Shaw confronted him. They said they had an altercation, and said that he got $5,000. That he roomed with Shoeless Joe, so he got that envelope with $10,000. He took half, gave Joe Jackson the other half. And he lost games 2, 5, and 8 in that World Series, and held the record for a long time as the most losses in a World Series in history. But there was a Yankee in the 80s, I think, maybe the 90s. He was a reliever, and he had some tough losses in relief and tied the record. So at least he ain't him alone anymore. When he was 66, he died, and that was in November of 1959. So that is Lefty Williams. Next guy is going to be Buck Weaver, and this will be the last one. Played third base on that team. He was from West Philadelphia. His dad was an iron worker. He was just a great infielder. He was a very beloved player and a nice guy by all accounts. Everybody talked about him, talked about what a great guy he was. He debuted with the White Sox. He got asked to go to spring training in 1912, and when he got there, I think it was in Arizona, his mother died, and he refused to leave to go to her funeral because he was getting a shot and he didn't want to blow it, and that left a mark with the White Sox brass, and they realized that how bad he wanted it, and then he ended up earning it. So when they broke camp in 1912, he was the shortstop. He didn't have a good season at the plate, so during the off season, between the 12 season and the 13 season, he taught himself how to switch hit. So he switch hit the rest of his career. In 1916, he had a bad season, went bankrupt when the season was over personally, so just had some bad luck. And again, that might have been, but he didn't accept money, so I was going to say that might have been a reason why he would get involved. I don't know. In 1917, he had a great season, but they had moved him to third base to make room for the rookie Swede Risberg, and he hit .333. Again, he did not take money. He was in on the meetings, and because of his knowledge, that was the reason he was banned. Till the day he died, he would always try to get reinstated. He would try to get a hold of Kennesaw Mountain Landis and see if they'd let him back in. He finally became very bitter he kicked around and played ball down on that Copper League, and he still loved playing ball. He day painted for the city of Chicago. He tried the pharmacy business. His brother-in-law was a pharmacist, and they ended up having like 6 to 8 pharmacies there and around Chicago. And at one point, they were invited by Charles Walgreen to be a junior partner in Walgreens right before they went really big. So he could have made a ton of money, but then the Depression hit and wiped them out, and they lost their stores. His final petition for being reinstated to baseball was in 1953 with Ford Frick, and he was told no. So his family, up until a few years ago, still petitioning Major League Baseball to get him reinstated. To me, out of all the guys, even Joe Jackson, him and Joe Jackson are the two that I have the most empathy for. I understand why the commissioner did what he did, but you still feel bad for this guy. He died when he was 65 years old on January 31st, 1956. So that's Buck Weaver. Thank you so much for watching this and listening. And I can't wait to share that episode with you with Dan Wallach. Thank you.